All right, hello folks again. We're going to continue with evolution in this video, and we want to talk about adaptations and surviving and really explain Darwin's theory of natural selection and how that is the mechanism that makes evolution possible. And there is a lot of evidence also, and we'll get to that as we go as well. So our objective is to explain the relationship between an adaptation and the ability to survive and reproduce. Okay, so a couple of terms we have to get down. In the process of natural selection, we often refer to this as survival of the fittest, which makes sense. So fitness, if you break it down, is the ability to survive and reproduce in a specific environment. And really, it's the ability of your children to reproduce as well, and your grandchildren. So the more reproduction, the more fit you are as an organism, the more successful you are. Um, Basically, the more DNA you pass on, the better off you are. So, an adaptation is any inherited. That's a key point. An adaptation must be inheritable, meaning you can get it from your parents. If I learn calculus and have a child, they're not going to know calculus, so that's not an inheritable thing. However, in a certain amount of intelligence, we notice is an inheritable characteristic. So, an adaptation must be inheritable, and increase an organism's chance of survival. Being stronger, being faster, larger, it all depends on the environment and what is best for that environment. And basically what's going to keep you alive so that you can reproduce. One famous example of natural selection is the peppered moth. In 1800s England, the peppered moth was a naturally occurring organism that where most of them in the populations, but due to a genetic mutation, some were black, and the black ones tended to become in a lower frequency, and the reason for that was, well, they kind of stick out more, where the white ones don't stick out as much because they would live and sit on types of lichen. What's happened is the Industrial Revolution changes the air. The lichen doesn't do as well, and it kind of starts to disappear. Well, guess what? Now, remember, their predator is a bird. The black moths are more frequent and more common, and you can see why. The genes of the white moth aren't doing so well when the trees are dark, where the black moth is going to blend in a lot better. So it's this random differences that get acted upon, and those differences or adaptations that are not good, or those changes are not good, tend to go away, where a successful adaptation, like being black in this situation, helps the moth blend in so that it can survive and produce more black offspring. Four things we need in order, and Darwin explains this right on the back of his book, The Origin of Species, what natural selection is and what is needed for it to occur. And there are four things: a struggle to survive, or a struggle for existence, he referred to it as, overproduction, variation, we now say genetic variation, and differential reproduction. So let's break each of these four things down. So, one, the struggle to survive. Individuals must compete and struggle for existence. This is common. Animals struggle for food, they struggle for space. They need to compete in order to get food and mates. Some variations improve the chance of surviving and reproducing, while other variations do not. So some are basically better at surviving than others. Overproduction is also what's happening. More offspring are produced than can survive to maturity. So what's occurring is more organisms are being produced than the environment can support. So populations end up kind of stabilizing because of this. Three, genetic variation. Within a population, individuals have different traits. So this means that there's diversity out there. We see this in people, but if you took enough time to look at different organisms, you would notice that even deer have a lot of variation between them, between their behaviors, their sizes, and their coloration. So all of these things are just show a little bit of variation, and that's just due to genetic changes over time that are passed down um, um, through a population. One example is some deer might have thicker fur or longer legs than others, and that's just natural. The last is differential reproduction. So Darwin concluded that organisms with the best adaptations are more likely to survive and reproduce. So meaning if you're better camouflage, you're going to survive, like the moths we saw early. If the environment changes, who's reproducing the most will also change, depending on how the environmental change affects a population of organisms, like the moths. Camouflage is a very common application we refer to. This stick bug here, well adapted in camouflage to avoid being eaten by predators and things like that. The zebra blends in with other zebras, which helps protect younger zebras and from predators. The white rabbit, and you can guess, well, how does all this work? Well, most likely rabbits that weren't white aren't around so much. So the ones that are pass their genes on, and the white genes end up being more common. Also, the lionfish, which blends in well with its surroundings, and also it has poisonous spines that help protect it. So this helps animals avoid predators and also catch prey. Mimicry is another very good evolutionary trait. Many predator organisms have learned to stay away from brightly colored things because that tends to indicate that they are poisonous or don't taste good or something like that. Like the monarch butterfly doesn't taste good; it's poisonous. This other butterfly has learned to kind of mimic it, and it's not that the butterfly chose this. It's just that all of the ones that didn't quite look like a monarch butterfly were taken by predators, and predators coincidentally avoided ones that they thought might be a monarch. So if you look kind of like a monarch, you pass on your monarch-looking genes, and over many generations, we start to see the emergence of this mimic. Same with the frogs, and also the scarlet king snake looks like the coral snake, but it's not poisonous, where the coral snake is very poisonous. So they will fool predators, and this will keep them safe. We see this a lot with wasp mimics too. Flies often mimic wasps to keep things away from them, even though they have no stinger. Survival of the fittest, in a nutshell, if we describe it, is only certain organisms of a population produce offspring. The traits being selected increase over time and contribute to an organism's fitness, meaning its ability to reproduce in its environment. And over time, this results in changes in the inherited characteristics of a population, increasing fitness in the environment. What this means is that organisms that are better adapted to their environment will produce more offspring, and if you give this a long enough period of time and the environment changes enough, new species could potentially emerge. And Charles Darwin saw this and recognized that it was possible, and that's why he entitled his book The Origin of Species. Some few other selection types out there. Artificial selection is where we control the selection of traits rather than nature. A really good example is pigeons. Aristotle talks about breeding pigeons. We've done it for a long time. You can also think of dogs. They have a common ancestor, the regular old pigeon, and we have bred them into many different varieties of pigeon, many of which wouldn't survive well in nature. But we selected traits. If you wanted a pigeon with fluffy feet, you looked for pigeons that had slightly fluffy feet and bred them over and over again until this came out. And same with these other ones as well. Sexual selection is a little different. It explains why there are such big differences between male and females of certain organisms. For example, the male deer versus the female doe, or female deer. In particular, why do they have major morphological or body differences? It usually has to do with a few things. Being desirable and being able to get mates is another way to get your genes passed on. Thing is, if you're a male peacock, you pass on your big tail genes as well, which is what the ladies like. However, at the same time, having a humongous tail is not great for evading predators. So you can see how animals are caught a lot between natural and sexual selection. Another example is the male female lion and the male sea lion and females. The male's much bigger, has to compete for mates with other males, so he needs to be big in order to pass his genes on. not only evade predators. And being big isn't always good because you need more food, it's harder to survive. Birds are often a great example, like a cardinal is red, the female is kind of cryptic and camouflage. So basically, that finishes up selection. You have Darwin's theory of natural selection, artificial selection, where we choose what traits are passed on, and then sexual selection, where you have to compete for mates by either using displays or being bigger and fighting off other males, and things like that. So there are many different forces controlling how organisms change over time, but the main one would be natural selection, which is where the environment selects inheritable traits that are best adapted to help that organism survive. And evidence of evolution, to be continued. We'll have another video of that coming up soon. So I hope this was helpful. If you were absent, very helpful, I hope.